Welcome to another episode of the Backstage Creative. My name is Krista Copper. This podcast focuses on the people who work behind the scenes of theater. I think now, more than ever, in the middle of a pandemic, at least I've been so reminded of how amazing live theater is and how important it is to our culture, and just the incredibleness of being a part of a live show. I'm a musician and I've been involved in theater for many years now. And I get so much inspiration from watching people work together to solve problems and watching stage managers handle sticky situations and watching audio engineers handle catastrophic sound problems in the middle of the show. And I'm a better musician, I'm a better creative, I'm a better person from my time spent around designers and stage managers and other musicians and around all the people who work so hard and put so much passion and love into creating live theater. Today is my conversation with sound designer Joanna Staub. Joanna lives and works in New York City. She has done a lot of really cool projects, has been involved as a mixer and audio engineer and sound designer on a lot of really neat Broadway productions and off-Broadway and regional and whatnot. And so it was a real pleasure to sit down and talk with her. If you like the Backstage Creative, I would love it if you would subscribe to this podcast, if you would head on over to Facebook and like the Backstage Creative podcast page. The Facebook page is also where I post show notes for the show. And if someone I interviewed has a website, I share that as well. So head on over there and that would be great. Here we go. Let's get to my conversation with Joanna Staub. Great. Let's start with what have you been doing these past 6 months to keep yourself entertained and occupied?
That's entertained is one word for it. Well, I was actually kind of lucky when everything happened in March. I was actually teaching when things first shut down. I was working as a one semester sabbatical replacement at Ithaca College in upstate New York. So when things shut down in March, I still had half a semester left. And so I spent half a semester hanging out and teaching in Ithaca, New York. But then in mid-May, I became unemployed like most everybody else. And I've kind of been bouncing around. I've been doing some work in politics, helping, volunteer for election, campaigns and stuff. And I've also been doing a lot of work helping get some podcasts, or actually more appropriately radio dramas organized for some theaters, because a lot of theaters are turning to that sort of production. So I've been helping do a couple of those smaller projects, and that's about it. Kind of hanging out, riding a bike a lot.
Yeah, I've been spending a lot of time outside too.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been like guest lecturers at places too. What are you mostly teaching, like talking about sound design or audio engineering, sound in general?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, when I was teaching at Ithaca College, I was very specifically the sound design professor, and so I tend to lecture on sound design. I do also talk a lot about women in sound and the history of that. People ask me to come and speak to that a lot. So yeah, I tend to stick to that. I stick to what I know, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. What do you talk about, like with the history of women in your field?
Well, it's kind of something that's been of interest. It's always been of interest to me, because I've been in the industry about 25 years. I've lived in New York City for 22. I'm of the age where I know a lot of the women who were the first. A lot of the women who were the first women to mix shows on Broadway and the first women to design shows on Broadway. They were my mentors. So I still have a lot of institutional knowledge in my brain about how women first came about in working in Broadway sound. So people just tend to pick my brain a lot, on that. And so I can speak a little bit to the women who were my mentors and some of whom are still working, and how we got to where we're at now and where we still have to go. So I think it's just because I have a big mouth when it comes to this topic. People just ask me to speak on it.
Hmm. That's how I first heard of you, was through I don't remember who did the article, but it was like 6 women in sound design. It was like you and Beth Lake and Jessica Paz and
Hmm. And the funny thing is, I was the oldest of the people in that article. And I kind of made a point in that article of giving a shout out to the women who were ahead of me, because I'm not the person who originated any of this stuff. um, Other people did. And so I kind of made a point at the beginning of that article of shouting out to about 5 or 6 women who were my mentors. Because quite frankly, Jess Paz was lovely and talked about me being her mentor. And I think that that's an important thing about women in sound, is that we do hand down to each other. I personally find that we tend to help each other out a little more than the men do sometimes. We're a little less backstabby, not that we're not on occasion. But I find that the women in the industry are always willing to give a leg up to the other women in the industry when it comes to sound. So I try to continue that.
that's crazy. That blows my mind that like you're, if you think of like you're like the second generation, like
Yeah,
it's not that it's still a new thing.
exactly. I'm kind of I would say I'm a weird age because I'm kind of between the second and the third generation. There are some women who I don't know. I mean, the absolute firsts I don't know. I had a really great opportunity about a year ago to sit and interview 4 women who were groundbreaking mixers on Broadway, and unfortunately, I just haven't had time to edit the interview and put it out yet. But to sit in a room with the woman who was the original mixer of Cats, you know and I think that's the important thing, is that these people who were groundbreaking in our industry are still alive, and I want to, and both men and women, I really want to make sure that we find a way to record that history before they're gone. So that's a project I'm starting to undertake right now. So, and I started with the girls because it was more fun, in my
I
opinion.
love that. Yeah, that sounds like a great project. I'm excited to follow along with that and see, yeah, the fruit of that.
Great. Hopefully I will get my act together and get it edited soon. So
Yeah, now you've publicly put it out there.
I
So,
put it out there. I have to follow through. No, yeah, it
Mhm.
was in fact, it was almost exactly this time last year. It's a very weird thing that there are several very, very influential women in Broadway sound who have all retired to the Seattle area. And since I was
Oh,
designing a show in Seattle, I was able to get 4 of them in a room together. And I also invited 2 young women who are local to Seattle designers to join us, and the 7 of us had a quite a lovely afternoon talking about the industry. And I have it on tape somewhere. So yeah.
yeah, that's good, important work. Yeah, thanks for doing that. So take us through your background, where you're from, where you went to school, if you went to school, and some of the major events in your life that have led you to where you are now.
Sure. I'm originally from central Pennsylvania, the Harrisburg area of Pennsylvania. I lived there my whole life through high school, and my background is in music. I am a classically trained concert flute player, and I attended for undergraduate school Ithaca College in upstate New York, where I was just teaching. And I originally went to Ithaca as a music major. And while I was there, got interested in theater. And I was already studying music and audio engineering as a degree program, but I got involved in live theater while I was there, and I met a man whose name is John Bracewell, which, again, going to our history lessons, was an incredibly influential teacher of sound design, of theater sound design. And he convinced me to take his live theater sound class. And so I ended up graduating with a blended degree, where I had studied music, television, film, radio, and live theater. And decided that I liked live theater. I think mostly because I was a live performer. I'm used to audiences. And I also kind of realized while I was a college student that I was never going to make a living as a professional flute player, to be quite honest. So I decided to pursue theater. And the summer after I graduated from Ithaca, I went out to the Santa Fe Opera and was an intern there for a summer. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I was on staff at the Arena Stage for a season in Southwest Washington, mixing shows for them. And at the end of that year, I kind of realized that if I was going to do this theater thing, there was more that I wanted to learn. So I made a decision to go back to graduate school and get my graduate degree in technical theater. And so I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, completed my MFA from UIUC. So I have a master's degree in sound design, in technical theater and sound design. At which point I moved to New York City. And I've been in New York City, like I said, for 22 years. And to be honest, it was kind of a quick decision. I went back for my third year of graduate school and found out in October that I was going to be able to graduate in December, and kind of did an oh crap, now what do I do? Because I hadn't really planned on starting my career in 8 weeks. But one of my best friends was living in the New York City area, and she said, "Hey, I need a new roommate. Why don't you come here?" And I said, "You know what? That sounds as good of a plan as anything." So I loaded up a U-Haul truck and moved to New Jersey, just outside of New York City. Was very fortunate to have some connections who introduced me to a man named John Kilgore, who's a very influential person in New York City theater. And they were like, "Go to John, find out how to get started." And I went and sat with John in his recording studio for an afternoon. And at the end of the day, he wrote down 6 names on a piece of paper with their phone numbers and this newfangled thing that people had called email at the time. um, and was like, "Reach out to these people. These are the 5 guys who do Broadway." And so I spent a week calling people and just networking. And I was unemployed for about 3 weeks, and got hired to mix a show at the Public Theater in downtown New York. And the rest is history. That was my first show in New York City, and I've been there ever since. Yeah. So that's kind of the origin story. I don't know how much further you want me to go from there.
That's good. What do you think? Why do you think, as starting out as a musician, why do you think you were drawn to, the design and the audio engineering side of sound?
I always liked technology, even though I admittedly didn't really understand it. I was the kid, I mean, granted, I grew up in the 80s, but I was the kid who, like when my Walkman broke, I would take it apart to see if I could figure out why it wasn't working. And, to be honest, I never figured out why it wasn't working when I was 10 years old. But it just was something that always interested me. What I love about where I have landed is that I still use every inch of my music background, years of music history and music theory and composition and conducting, and I still use all of it. I just don't put a flute to my mouth and play music anymore. But everything else about my music experience is still there. And that's what I love about it.
Hmm. From my perspective, like the sound world is so big, right? There's so many different avenues you can take. I mean, it's similar with like I'm a musician, and so there's so many different places I can go and like things I can pursue. How did you kind of decide on like a focus? Like, was it intentional how you got into like the theater world and designing on Broadway and things like that, or did it just kind of happen?
I mean, it's a combination of the people who I met and the places I was. I happened to be at a school that had a really great musical theater program, and I didn't go to Ithaca for theater. I went to Ithaca for music. They have one of the top musical theater programs in the country. I happened to meet a man who was one of the most influential teachers. I mentioned his name earlier, John Bracewell, is the man who literally wrote the book on sound design. He wrote the first ever textbook in sound design. And some of his previous students were Tony Miola and Tom Clark. And the fact that I came out of that same school, just it was happenstance that I just ended up being in the right place at the right time, that this is where I ended up. Whether you believe it was on purpose or something put me there, I don't know. But it's just kind of where I ended up, and happened to be in the right place at the right time with the right people.
Yeah, the more I talk to people, the more I hear people say, this wasn't like the plan, or I just kind of fell into it. And I mean, it's the same with me. I just kind of fell into theater, because no one else wanted to play the musical.
Exactly. And I jokingly say nobody goes into theater sound on purpose. Like everybody ended up here by accident. I've never met anybody who says that at the age of, well, that's not true. I actually very recently met my first person who, like, at the age of 16, was like, "Yep, I want to mix Broadway shows." I was like, "Good on you, but you're the first person that I ever knew that could say that in high school." So hopefully we have set her on her way to get there. But it is a weird industry that nobody has a straight line to. I don't very few people have a straight line to.
Hmm. I wonder if that will ever change. I wonder if that's something that, since theater is, it's not really newer, but you think of like symphony orchestras are so old. I wonder if that'll ever change with theater, that maybe it'll become more, as more colleges have like technical programs and stage management programs. I wonder if that will be more of a thing.
It'll be interesting. I think what's happening right now in the world is going to have a big influence on things because sound design in theater has always been kind of the bastard stepchild a little bit. We always are the last people hired. We have the smallest, we often have the smallest budgets. This whole move to podcasting and dramatic theater and, scripted dramas and things is making people look at sound designers differently, especially regional theaters who are producing self-producing scripted dramas. It's making them realize that sound is really hard. And that, when sound
Hmm.
designers ask for all those hours to do quiet time and set things up, we're not lying. But I think it will be interesting to see on the other side of the COVID world if we maintain the respect that we're earning from people right now for these outside the theater projects versus, if it'll just go back to the way things were. I actually was just on a conversation with some other colleagues earlier this afternoon about the fact that the way students are being taught, even students that are studying theater right now, they're being taught differently because they don't have access to the space and the people that we do normally in our professional world, and it's making them think differently, and I don't necessarily think that's going to be a bad thing. Those of us who are hardened professionals are going to have to look at kids coming out of college a little differently because they might not have the exact skills that they would have had if they had not gone through COVID, but they're also going to have some different skills that we may find interesting and intriguing. And I'm really
Mm.
kind of excited to see where it goes. I'm actually quite interested. I haven't decided yet if it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, but it's definitely going to be a different thing. So we'll see how it works.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point. I work in like a public school, and yeah, it's interesting thinking about, okay, how is this going to affect, these kids when they're in high school, and
Oh,
and I
absolutely.
usually think of it in terms of bad things, but hopefully there'll be some good things that will come from, having a little different education than what.
I
Mhm.
think it's also going to be really interesting. Kids who are little kids right now, they're missing socialization in a lot of ways. They're missing, and it's going to be interesting how it affects our society when this is all over.
Mhm.
We've all forgotten how to interact with people.
Yep. Do you have a favorite part of the sound design process?
Oh, without a doubt, because I'm an orchestral musician. I mean, I prefer to work on musicals. I mean, I do both plays and musicals, but if I have my choices, I will do a musical first. And absolutely, without a doubt, my favorite part of the process is sitz probe, with Vondel probe, with band seating and Vondel probe being a close second. And I'm going to assume that you know what all of those words meant.
Yes.
Okay. So you'd be surprised. Some people don't know what, but it's sits probe, especially for me, is such a great moment because especially in musical theater, you're telling stories through music, and sits probe is the first time that everybody hears everything together. And there's always this beautiful, almost always this very beautiful energy in the room of excitement of this new level of experience of hearing full orchestrations. And it's the same moment, orchestra seating. I love orchestra seating just because that's the process of a big jigsaw puzzle to me. I love to sit and think about how we're going to seat the orchestra together so that they can see each other and hear each other in the way they need to. And so orchestra seating is about putting that puzzle together. And then when you finally do Vondelprobe, it's this moment of, seeing an actor straighten up a little bit higher as they try to hit the back of the theater and get to hear the strings and try to pull the instrumentation out. And I just feel like it's such a moment that very few people get to see, especially because all the other designers leave at that point in the process. And it's the one moment that sound really, really gets to work. There's no holding for sound in Vondelprobe. It's sound's work time. And I will get chills faster than anything when you are doing a Vondel probe and the lead actor gets to stand up and sing their 11 o'clock number for the first time, because it will almost always bring the house down, even though the house is only your colleagues. And also because that's the day that the cast get to sit in the theater and really hear the music with the orchestra in the theater. And I think it's the only time that the cast really appreciate what sound does. So those 3 days are definitely my favorite days.
Yeah, I love a Zitz probe, and because everyone always loves the band, even when we sound like crap because we've only had 2 rehearsals. Like
Exactly.
everyone is so excited about the band.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely.
This might be kind of showing my ignorance, but so on musicals, the sound designer, are you? How does that differ from like the audio engineer part of it?
Well, the sound designer on a musical is far more technological. It's about, picking the microphones, picking the speaker placements, making sure that there's coverage in the room for all the audience members, and then also like I said, how the orchestra is going to sit together, how you're going to mic the different instruments. And it's the sound designer that makes all of those decisions. It's always tell people it's 100,000 decisions that a sound designer has to make. And the engineer is I always say the associate designer and the engineer together are kind of the make it so team. I always compare it to like a Star Trek episode where, I, yeah, I know it's so weird. Like Captain Picard comes up with these crazy ideas, but he's never the one that actually makes them happen. He turns to the
Yeah.
guy sitting next to him and says, "Make it so." And so the engineer is the team, is the rest of the team. They're the people that actually make it happen. So I think that that's the difference. It's the sound designer is the person that comes up with the plan, the ridiculous plan, and then the engineer is the person the engineers plural in different places in the theater make the plan happen. So that's the breakdown between the two positions.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay.
So you've designed for a lot, like Broadway, off Broadway, touring, regional. What are other big differences between doing like commercial theater and non for profit theater and touring when it comes to design?
I mean, the funny thing is the differences are huge.
Okay.
Let's start with commercial theater, which, for all intents and purposes is primarily Broadway. I have been incredibly fortunate in my career that I've gotten to work on some really great art on Broadway. I've gotten to work on some really great theater on Broadway. Right now, a lot of Broadway, I don't call theater, I call it entertainment, which is mean
Mm,
that it's not necessarily bad, but it's also not necessarily high art either. I believe very strongly that all aspects of theater are very important. If people just want to go see a light musical that's going to make them laugh, because God knows, like right now, we all need to laugh. We're all missing laughter. I'm happy to work on a show that's just a silly, fluffy, romantic comedy that are going to make people swoon a little because that's what people need. Versus, if you're going to do a dark piece of theater that's very intense and has a heavy topic, that's important too, because if that's a topic that needs to be discussed, I think it's very important in our business to do the full gamut of types of entertainment, types of theater and types of entertainment. The thing about Broadway is that it is a business. You spend so much time calculating expenses versus cost, and is it worth it? Can you stay within budget? Are you going to turn a profit? Every decision ultimately ends up at that. I mean, even the greatest pieces of theater that I've worked on Broadway, we still had to have an argument about the weekly rental of the sound gear. Whereas when you get into like regional theater, obviously you're working at a lower budget and you walk in the door knowing that. You know up front what the cost is and or what your budget is. Not that you don't on Broadway, you do on Broadway as well, but the budget different is so different, and you're often working with an in-house system. So I know when I walk in the door that I have 10 speakers and this is my sound console and I have a QLab playback and that's it. And then it's how am I going to use these things? How am I going to use the resources at hand? And to me, that turns so much more towards the creativity of it. What can I do with 10 speakers and a sound console? Some people can do more with 10 speakers and a sound console than other people can. And I feel like you have to be so much more creative, and that gets my juices flowing a little more. But, like you having to think through the process and how things are handled. I feel like you do so much more art in non for profit than you do in for profit theater. But don't get me wrong, when somebody tells me that I can put a $3 million sound system in a room and play with it, I am going to take the money and run. And I love it. And that's what I love about it. And I will very often use big tacky projects that play well but aren't really all that interesting from a creative standpoint to put some money in my bank account so that I can go do a little tiny project off Broadway that's going to feed my soul a little bit. And so I think it goes back and forth about it. But it's not to say that, I'm still a sucker for 2,000 people in a theater who cheer when a big fancy lead walks on stage and everybody goes nuts, because it can still give you goosebumps. And it's just a matter of where you want to be and what sort of theater you want to work at. And so I'm just very lucky that I am in a point in my career where I can move fluidly back and forth between the different types of theater and spend some time feeding my bank account and then spend some other time feeding my soul.
I like to ask people who have worked on Broadway kind of what that experience is like. Broadway, I don't think everyone needs to have the dream of working on Broadway, right? Like there's other.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Broadway is a thing. Not everybody's meant to be there. Like I said, it's a business. It is cutthroat. It is hard. It is also a club. The same people get hired all the time, not necessarily because they're the best person for the job, but it's because they're who the producer knows. And that's definitely one of the most frustrating things for me as far as Broadway sound design is if you look at the people. I mean, I hate to say this because they are my colleagues and I know that ultimately they're good guys, but the fact of the matter is 97% of Broadway shows are designed by six white guys. And it's so frustrating, because, and it's not just about the white or the guy or anything. I just want to see other people have a chance. And I don't blame it as an out overt sexism or overt racism. I think it's just lazy producers who know what sound designer X's shows are going to sound like, so they just hire them again and again and again and again and again. It's a glass ceiling in some ways for women, but it's a ceiling for everybody. Getting your first Broadway show is incredibly hard for so many people. And you have to have the thick skin and the strong backbone to get there. And that's not everybody's cup of tea. And I don't blame anybody for saying they have no interest in living in New York City and that they have no interest in working on Broadway. Living in New York City is expensive and working on Broadway is hard. There is incredible theater being done in regional, even in community theater. I've seen some amazing, productions, and you need to go find the space that you belong in and be there. And I don't question anybody for any point that they work at in any place. Don't feel bad if you don't want to work on Broadway. Most definitely. But I know what I started to say. I heard a really great. It's not a real story. It's something I actually saw happen one time, which was that I was working on a show with a particular famous Hollywood actor starring in it, and it was not his first Broadway show. I think it was his second or his third. But in the middle of opening night, he stopped the show and he proceeded to tell the history of the theater that we were in and the shows that had been done on that stage. And he did something really beautiful, which is he got down on his hands and knees and he touched the floor and he said, this stage right here, people spend their whole lives getting to this wood. And he took the time to acknowledge that we had three people in our cast who were making their Broadway debuts. And I thought that was really fabulous for an A-list Hollywood actor to do that, to pull three chorus girls out and be like, let's take a moment to celebrate these women, because it's super easy because of the clubby nature of Broadway. And that, I've been doing Broadway shows for 20 years to get jaded. I don't think twice about walking through through a Broadway stage door and out onto a Broadway stage because I've been doing it for so long. And the reason I tell the story about the Hollywood actor is that it made me kind of stop and think a little bit, to stop being so jaded, to stop taking it for granted. Because, the first Broadway show I remember, the second one I really remember, and then there's a couple that I don't really remember. And that's a shame, because people who work on Broadway do take it for granted sometimes. And it shouldn't be that way. It should still be a special place. And that would be my biggest wish about Broadway theater, is that we would stop being so jaded and start being more open to different people and different ideas and different ways of doing things. Kind of strangely, going back to my initial comment, to my earlier comment about students coming out of school in the next few years who are going to have different ideas, I think it could be really interesting. And that's just how I ended up thinking about that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much risk involved, I'm sure, with putting up a Broadway show. I hope, in terms of financial recoupment and whatnot. I understand why the same people get chosen and they kind of play it safe. But yeah, I hope that they
No,
kind of get
absolutely. And you're
shaken
and
up a
what
little bit.
exactly. What you've hit on is exactly it. You're talking about millions of dollars.
Hmm.
And you want to know that your investors' money is going to be protected and spent wisely. And I get it. I absolutely get it. It just frustrates me because I want to see it be different. I want to see it be better.
Hmm. And stay relevant.
Yes.
It's gonna lose the relevancy if it just keeps staying the same.
Without a doubt. Absolutely, without a doubt.
Hmm.
And the interesting thing is, I think is a good comparison. I haven't spent a lot of time working in Las Vegas, but I understand that's very similar, because they don't look at what they're doing as theater. They look at it as entertainment, and it's all about the bottom line. Like, they want to give people a good show. They want to, keep people interested and keep people coming back. But it's all about how much money is being spent versus how much is being recouped and how much is being brought in. And I definitely would say to any student who's listening to this, my big regret in all of my college education is that I never took a business class. Understanding the business, how businesses run, is something that, if you're going to go into commercial theater or commercial entertainment, you have to have an understanding of, so that you understand why the pennies are being pinched.
Yeah, that's good advice. How do you grow as a designer?
By listening to other people. I think designers who don't grow are designers who think they know the right thing, the best thing all the time. And I think I learned more this past spring, putting myself at a school, in a place that I wasn't comfortable, in a job that I wasn't comfortable in, and right off the bat, and challenging myself helped me learn and grow more than anything. And I think that's the biggest thing, is being willing to put yourself in situations where it's not always comfortable. It's super easy. Like, I spent a lot of years as a Broadway associate, and I made good money and I worked consistently and things were great, but I was getting bored. And so, changing my location, changing the projects I was taking, changing the position I was taking in the projects helped me get better. Even what Since I've lived in New York City, I've worked as a mixer for many years, before working as an associate and then moving on to being a designer. And I think I am a better designer because of the time I spent as an A2, because of the time I spent building sound systems, and because of the time I spent on tour, has made me a better designer, because I see it from different angles. But it doesn't mean that I know everything. If somebody's going to come up to me and have an idea or a suggestion, I'm absolutely going to listen to them, because you never know who's going to give you a piece of information, or a piece of knowledge that you didn't have previously, that's going to make you better and make you grow. And so that's the biggest thing for me, is just being open.
That's one of the great things I think about working in our field is that we're usually working with different people on different shows, even if there's some crossover. You have access to a lot of different people's creativity
Oh,
and
yeah.
prior experiences. I think it's great.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things I love about my career right now. Like, last a year ago seems so far away at this point, but like last fall, I got on a plane, flew to Chicago, did a show in Chicago, and then flew to Seattle, did a show in Seattle, stayed on the West Coast for a break, and then did a second show in Seattle. So I did three different shows with two different lighting designers, three different set designers, three different costume designers, three different directors, two different music directors, and I first of all, I love the diversity. I love the change, but I also love the fact that you meet people who you like to work with and you do multiple projects with them, which helps you develop in that sense as well. But I love the fact that I'm never in the same place all the time. And yeah, sooner or later that's going to get exhausting. I'm sure of it. But I love the diversity and I love the opportunity to all the different places and things and people and smells and tastes that I get to experience in my life that my career has brought me.
Hmm. Inspiration is everywhere, if you keep that openness.
Absolutely.
How do you choose which projects to work on?
This is going to sound weird. I am still getting my job offers at a pace where I don't turn shows down very often. I guess I'm lucky that I've gotten in with people who I like working with who continually call me for work. I take projects that I find of interest first. I take pick projects with people who I like working with first. I like projects that are put in front of me that are going to introduce me to new people who I'm excited to work with first. Then you have to think a little bit about how much money am I going to make? Am I going to be able to pay my rent with this project? I about a year and a half ago was put in a situation where I had to choose between two projects, and to be honest, one of them was a play and one of them was a musical, and I'd rather be doing musicals. So I backed out of a play to do a musical. So that's a decision sometimes too. And the fact of the matter is the reality is sometimes if you've got a lull in your calendar and you get offered some really terrible corporate industrial that you have no interest in doing, but it's going to give you a lot of good money for not as much time, you do it. So it is, you hope to be able to make decisions based for creative reasons, but sometimes in this industry, you got to pay the rent too. So it depends. It depends where you're at, which reasons are the reasons that you make the decisions for first. But you do have to look at all of them.
Hmm. Thoughts on like advocating for more money, more resources, more time. How do you? I would imagine, that sometimes you need to advocate for yourself. Do you have any thoughts on how to do that well?
Well, I think there's different. You kind of asked a couple different questions there because I do think that they're different. Advocating initially for your time and your money. I have an amazing agent who I work very closely with, and he is better at advocating for me than I am sometimes. And when you hit a point in your career where you are working with an agent, make sure you get one who is going to advocate for you because it's important. And sometimes you need somebody to point out to you that you're not asking for enough money and tells you that it's okay to ask for more. It's something, especially women in the industry, I think need more help with than men do because the men are like, of course I'm worth more money. And the girls aren't always. The women tend, in my experience, the women in our industry tend to be willing to accept less money to get their foot in the door. And we
Hmm.
shouldn't have to do that. We belong in the door. So we should get paid the same as the men do. Advocacy for jobs, I is this is a big thing for me right now because I'm super, super being very vocal about the fact that we've got to get some more diversity in sound design. There have been these really great research projects recently that basically showed that on average, anywhere between 95 to 97% of all theater is sound designed by white men. And we've got to fix that number. And so I'm speaking to anybody who will listen to me, that we've got to fix that. And I am personally willing to scream on behalf of all women and persons of color to that extent, and also LGBTQ, because it's not about me; it's about the industry. We have to fix that because it's just unacceptable. But I'm also established enough in my career that I can stand up and be the one that yells a little in a room, and the guys all go, "Yeah, fine, that's Joanna being Joanna." But I can also get heard in rooms where other people can't. And I feel like I need to take advantage of being in that place in my career to do that. Because if I can speak loud enough to open the floor up to let a few other women or persons of color or LGBTQ people speak up, then I need to do that. That's my job right now. But then once you're in the door, the advocating is a little different. No matter what level you're working at, it is part of your job to try to stay in budget. It is part of your job to do the best job that you can. And it's something that really gets me frustrated is that so many production managers in the industry don't really understand sound design. So they lead with no. Can we buy another speaker? Can we move this microphone? Can we move a lighting position to get a better speaker position? And so often they lead with no. That's incredibly frustrating to me. And it speaks to the small mindedness of some people when it comes to sound design. I've been really fortunate to be in some rooms where people don't lead with no. And I hope that sentence makes sense when I'm saying lead with no. It's that, can I do this? No. Um,
Hmm.
when you say, can I do this? And the production manager goes, well, let's have a talk about that. That's my favorite thing on the planet. Like I always say people, my least favorite sentence is that's how we've always done it. Because that makes us boring and stale. And when I get a lighting designer or a set designer or a production manager who are like, sure, you want to hide speakers in the set? Let's talk about how we can hide a speaker in the set. You need a speaker there? Great. One of my favorite stories was I was doing a production of Mamma Mia, and the set didn't allow me to have a front fill speaker where I needed it. And I was sitting in the theater one day, like staring at the set, going, I need a speaker right there where there's nothing to put a speaker in. And the technical director and the production manager and the set designer came over to me, and I said, I need a speaker. I've got a whole set of people here in the audience that can't hear. And we all kind of sat there and stared at the set for a second. And somebody, I'm pretty sure it was the production manager, said, well, I mean, there's a boat sitting there. Wouldn't there be a pylon? And I was like, um, yeah, the boat could get tied to a pylon. They're like, great, we're going to build a pylon right there. We're going to put a speaker in it because that's where you need a front fill. And I was like, that was amazing. It was like a simple, such a simple solution to, making sure that 30 people in the audience could hear. And it became such a joke because I grumble about set designers not liking front fills all the time, that I was super excited to have just a simple conversation where I collaborated with the other people in the room to solve a problem. And those are the moments that I love. And I just hope to have more of them.
Yeah, it totally changes the atmosphere in the room when people's response, like back to that open mindedness, when people are open minded
Yeah.
instead of just immediately shutting down.
Yep. Exactly. Exactly. And I love it. I love sitting in I don't have a lot of background in scenic design or lighting design. So when I can sit with them and explain things about, acoustics or, you need the set piece to be that big. Well, then let's find a speaker that's only big enough to put in that hole. That's what I love about working in live theater is being in a room with other people. And that's something that you don't do as often when you work in film or television. People tend to work a little more in pieces. I went into live entertainment because I want to be in a room with other people.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd love to talk just a little bit about your work as a mixer and audio engineer. Can I use those two terms interchangeably?
So yeah, totally. I think it's the what is not interchangeable about them is when I say that I'm a mixer, that is actually sitting at the board throwing faders. When I talk about being an audio engineer, there's so much work in doing sound design that is not sitting at the faders. It's putting microphones on actors, knowing how to mic a pit, knowing how to make a synthesizer work, running speakers, hanging speakers. Like that is audio engineering. Whereas being the mixer is being the person sitting at front of house behind all those lights and faders, if that makes sense.
Yes, that does make sense.
Okay.
So let's talk about being a mixer.
Okay.
Because you've done some cool. I was looking at your website just before we started this conversation. You've done some cool mixing work. Do you ever feel for me, I always feel kind of bad for the poor mixer in the back because something always goes wrong or like technology does something weird that's not their fault.
Yes.
How do you handle? I feel like that's a high pressure job.
Oh, it's total pressure job. And to be honest, it's part of the reason I don't do it anymore. I'm going to be honest. I love mixing. I love it. What I discovered I don't love is 8 shows a week of the same show. Because I've mixed Broadway shows, and 8 shows a week is hard. And God bless anyone who does it and anyone who does it well. And the only thing worse than being the lead mixer on a show is being the backup mixer on a show, because the cast hate you. The cast are like, but she doesn't mix the same way he does, and like, it doesn't, it's such a that's a whole other conversation about having multiple mixers on a show, But I love sitting behind a console and throwing faders, but I just didn't like doing 8 shows a week. There was one night I was mixing a show and I realized we were halfway through Act One and I hadn't been paying attention. Because when you're doing a long running show, you will actually memorize the mix. So you don't have a script in front of you, you're doing it from memory. And it's very easy to fall into just doing muscle memory instead of actually paying attention. And that's when I realized I wasn't supposed to be mixing shows anymore. And so and I had already had some people pushing me towards moving into associate design work at that point, so I kind of took the leap. It is hard. I think this goes a little bit to me talking earlier about the fact that if you're going to work in especially in as a professional mixer on Broadway, you have to have thick skin and you have to have a strong back. One of my favorite stories to tell about a nightmare in theater was I was actually on tour with a production of with the first national tour of Thoroughly Modern Millie, and we were playing Salt Lake City. And I was mixing the show one night, and the console literally blew up in the middle of the show. It just stopped passing. It stopped passing sound. And there's this moment of like, oh crap! I'm being nice and hiding my expletives that actually came out of my mouth. What do we do? I called back to the guy who was on deck, and I said, we lost the deck, we lost the console. He's like, okay, hold on, I'm powering down. And he powered down all the amplifiers and he ran out to front of house. And I literally shut down front of house and turned front of house back on. Now, the trick to this is the show never stopped, the show kept going on. And my colleague and I powered up the front of house console and realized what had gone wrong. We fixed the problem. We actually rewired something at front of house to make the console work again. Turned the console on, and it looked like it was passing signal. So then he ran back around to the backstage and turned all the amps back on again. And I turned the faders up, and sound came out of the system again. And it was very cute because the lovely Salt Lake City audience applauded when the sound came back on. um, um, and all I remember was very close to the end of Act One when it happened. And I mixed the last song of Act One, and I turned, and as the song ended, I turned around and realized that standing behind me was our production stage manager and our company manager, who were both like, "You okay? Do you need anything?" And then I realized standing next to the company manager was the head of wardrobe with a little tiny paper Dixie cup with a shot of Jack Daniels in it. And I took the shot of Jack Daniels and drank it, and then looked at my company manager, and I was like, and as I'm saying this, my boss appears next to me, and he's like, and I said, "Get the designer on the phone now." And granted, now you got to play time zone math. This was 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night in Salt Lake City, which means New York has gone to bed already. And all of our tech support was in New York City. We were lucky enough to get our designer on the phone, and he put all the things in motion to get us repair work, to get the gear to do repairs the next day. And that's again a whole other story. But what I remember the next night, after we'd fixed the console and I was backstage and my colleague was mixing front of house, I had an actor walk up to me and go, "How long did we not have sound?" And I was like, "I don't know." And so, but I knew exactly where the sound had gone out, and I knew exactly where the sound had come back on. And we hit a stopwatch, and it was 7 minutes and 48 seconds.
Nice.
We'd gone through that entire story that just took me longer than that to tell you the story. We had gone through that entire process in just under 8 minutes. I was like, that's crazy. But it's because my colleague and I trusted each other. We worked through the process and we did it. And what my company manager and stage manager said to us was that I hadn't even realized that they were standing there the whole time. This was going on, but they could see that the two of us were working, and they were like, "We just stayed out of your way and let you keep working because we could see that you were doing it." And I honestly have very little memory of what happened that night. I just went into, how do you go through, if you were trying to suss through a problem, without the show going on, what would you do? You shut the sound system off, you reboot, you look at your computers, you figure out what's wrong, you see where the signal stops going, turn everything off, repatch what you need to, turn everything back on again. Oh, look, it's passing signal now. Great. Turn on the sound system. We basically did the process you would go through of problem solving, of tech, of teching, of something going wrong. We just did it in 8 minutes while the show didn't stop. um, Being able to do that isn't necessarily what everybody can do. In a strange way, I look at that story as like one of my biggest accomplishments in the industry is that I didn't panic. I did get a hole in my stomach, but we still worked through the problem. And then I mixed the last 5 minutes of the show, and then took the shot at Jack Daniels. you know, um, so it's you have to have faith in your skills. You have to trust your skills, trust your knowledge, and do the job. And if you're not the person that's up for that, then you're not that's fine. Go find somewhere else to work where you are comfortable.
Yeah, I think the best mixers I've ever worked with are the ones that just, like you said, it's kind of like this automatic, like flip into this automatic problem solving, and they have all these ideas of like things to try, and let's try this. Maybe it's this cable. Maybe let me reroute this speaker. Yeah, I've had some moments, watching mixers deal with like these kind of catastrophic sound issues in the middle of the
Exactly.
show. And
Exactly. I had a night where I was mixing Les Mis on Broadway, and Jean Valjean came out at the top of the barricades with a dead mic on. Um, and for those of you playing along at home, that's 45 minutes until Valjean leaves the stage. I mixed my mind off that night. But I was lucky enough, I had an incredibly talented actor who realized his mic was out, and he walked around the stage and found people on the stage and walked up to them and just talked at everybody's heads for the entire for the entire 45 minutes. And you just have to, in a strange way, that's the stuff that I find exhilarating. I don't remember the other 300 performances of Les Mis where everything went right. I remember, and that's the fun part about live theater. That's the stuff people want to see. you know
yeah.
and that's what I love about it, is that it is a challenge. I like a challenge. I like the fact that my job is a little different every day, and that I'm not bored. I'm constantly having to learn new gear, new techniques, new styles, new people, new shows, new topics. That's what I love about my job, is that it's never boring.
hmm Yeah, I mean, even as a musician, playing the same show night after night, sometimes for several months, I don't know, I never get bored.
Yeah,
Something's always different. Something's always the audience, and yeah.
exactly. Exactly.
hmm hmm So my final question I like to ask everyone is advice to young people who want to do what you do.
My biggest piece of advice that I give to students who are coming out of school and who are early in the industry is to realize that this is a business, and you are the commodity. You are selling yourself. When you're trying to get a job, when you're trying to make connections, when you're trying to meet people, you have to have the confidence to walk up to somebody you've never met before, stick your hand out and say, "Hi, I'm Joanna." Don't be afraid to do that. If I'm sitting at front of house and you think you know who I am, come up and say hi. Because what you have to remember is that 22 years ago, I was the person walking up to people and sticking my hand out and saying hi. So you have nothing to be ashamed of by saying, "Hi, I'm new in town and I want to introduce myself." By finding, it's like you said, you found my website. There's an email address there. Send me an email. Be understanding if you send a busy designer a contact, a hi email, that they might not get back to you for a few days, because if we're in tech or busy, sometimes it takes some time. But for the most part, most designers will get back to you. But don't be afraid to cold call people. Don't be afraid to find emails and reach out to people. Find the designers you want to work with. Find the directors you want to work with, and reach out to them, because you've got to kick the door down. We like to open doors for other people in this industry, but you have to do some of the work on yourself as well. So be willing to advocate, like you said, advocate for yourself, push for yourself, and sell yourself, and have confidence while you're doing it. I think that's the trickiest thing that people don't always realize in this industry. And if that's not for you, that's fine. Then being a freelancer might not be the right place for you. Maybe going to regional theater where you have a steady job 9 months of the year, or going to work for a company that builds gear, or a rental house where people rent gear. There's so many other jobs in this industry besides being the designer or the mixer. You just need to find the place in this industry that is what fits your skills and your demeanor and what is going to make you happy. Don't be afraid to go seek out those other places to work if being the person behind the console when it blows up isn't necessarily the right thing for you.
The music for the Backstage Creative was improvised and performed by Ian Leroy, and the logo was designed by Zach Rimbold.